Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 91. We're reporting live from Sochi, Russia, where George and I have just taken the bronze for synchronized pairs skating. Quite a day on the ice, George.
Oh, absolutely. You should have heard what Dick Button had to say about our turnout today.
It's the way it works. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today's February 8th, 2014.
Via the magic of Skype, I have Peter from Canterbury. Peter, is it true your degree comes from Oxford? Athanasius. Good choice. George, boy, not much going on in the news this week. There's something about a news release from Lambeth Palace. Presiding Bishop Catherine Jefferts Shorey is to receive an honorary degree in divinity from Oxford University, a place of which you're an alumni. Cool. So George and I are like, well, how do we parse this story? Because everybody is kind of upset in one way or the other. And there's basically three reasons people are upset. One, why on earth would Oxford University do something like this? Two, who is the real Catherine Jefferts Shorey? Because it was not in this press release. Three, who is Justin Welby? Did he put this out? Did Lambeth Palace put this out? Who is going to lose their job over this? And George and I are really trying to say, where do we start? Because we want to be fair in how we report this, despite for some of our personal feelings for Oxford, for Catherine Jefferts Shorey, or for Justin. George, let's go with box one here. Why would Oxford University point to Catherine Jefferts Shorey and say, lady, writer, scholar of scholars, you deserve a divinity award from us?
Kevin, when I saw this, I just rolled my eyes because it was so not unexpected. What is the big issue in the Church of England right now? It's women bishops.
Absolutely.
Professor Marilyn McCord Adams, who was once a professor of mine when she taught at Yale, is on the theology faculty at Oxford. She's also the representative of the university to the General Synod of the Church of England. And she's a very compassionate supporter of women bishops, women clergy. This is a symbolism doctrine. In other words, Catherine Jefferts Shorey's, the person of Bishop Jefferts Shorey, is not who is receiving the degree. It is the office plus the chromosome for women getting the doctorate to make a domestic point of why we support women bishops. So Oxford University doing something left liberal, symbolic, is about, I wouldn't do it, but it is absolutely no surprise to me, and it needs to be looked into in that context. It's not being a personal mark of favor for Catherine Jefferts Shorey, but just, it's like Barack Obama getting the Nobel Peace Prize. We didn't deserve it, but the people in the committee felt that they want to make a statement.
Sure.
It's the same thing.
And a statement here has been made. So let's move on to what we'll call the woman who is presiding Bishop Catherine Jefferts Shorey. Now, in the press release, Justin Welby, and it's under quotes, he said, I am delighted by the news that the Most Reverend Catherine Jefferts Shorey is to receive an honorary Doctor of Divinity from the University of Oxford. This award, richly deserved, reaffirms Bishop Catherine's remarkable gift of intellect and compassion. Well, let's start there. We published one of our sermons, and you kind of wrote up a little dissertation explaining the sermon. Tell me what you think of her intellect on a professional level, George.
Well, I'm sure she's a very bright woman. She has a degree in oceanography, but she's no theologian.
No.
She's certainly no biblical scholar or exegete. I think the biggest story we ever had at Anglican Inc. was our report on her sermon from Curacao, where she accused the Apostle Paul of just being mean-spirited and bigoted for casting out a demon in a slave girl who had a prophetic ministry for an evil spirit. And Catherine Jefferts Shorey said, that's terrible. Paul is jealous of this evil spirit. Now, I don't know. We had over 130, 140,000 people read that article.
Yes.
And it just took off across the internet. Catherine Jefferts Schori has never been considered a biblical scholar, a theological scholar. She has gifts of administration. Bishop John Howe told me that, though he may not agree with almost anything that she says, she ran the House of Bishops much better than Frank Griswold ever did. So she's a good administrator, and I'm sure she's a good squid scientist. Her background is in squids and other soft, squishy creatures that live in the dark.
I would also say
sort of like the House of Bishops, Kevin.
Yes, it's squids.
So intellect, yes, but theology, no.
No.
And then there's the issue of compassion that Justin Welby touched on.
Well, it's interesting because if I were to rewrite this with factual things of a press release, I would want to mention that Catherine Jefferts Schori, in her tenure as presiding bishop, was able to, through her compassion and intellect, depose more priests and clergy than any other person in history. Wow! That's cool. That's something you want to put in a press release. During her tenure as presiding bishop, she has sued more churches, clergy, and vestry people than any other presiding bishop in history. That should be there. That's an achievement unlike any other. It's almost Olympian, in my point of view. We go on here. He says, Bishop Catherine Jefferts Schori pursued a career in oceanography, and her enduring deep commitment to the environment has evolved into a profound dedication to stewardship of our planet and humankind, especially in relieving poverty and extending the love and hospitality of Christ to those on the edge of society. Well, yes, she's taken up the United Nations approach to Christendom, and there's a little bit of truth to that. Justin goes on to say, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said of Bishop Catherine, in her version of reality, and let's just stop there, if that doesn't say a lot, everything is sacred except sin. It must be noted, too, this is outside that quote, that Bishop Catherine's achievements serve and will continue to serve as a powerful model for women seeking to pursue their vocation in the church. So we go back to Oxford. They picked her because she is obviously an incredible women bishop. England's in a deal with women bishops, and now Justin Welby has said this is what a woman bishop should look like, act like, and be like, George. Am I off there?
A little bit off, Kevin. I mean, let's just look. When she was Bishop of Nevada, which was one of the fastest growing states in the United States, the Diocese of Nevada had one of the worst growth records of any diocese in the Episcopal Church. In fact, if you compare it against population growth and diocesan growth, it was the most unsuccessful diocese in the Episcopal Church when she had 10 years Bishop of Nevada. When she was Bishop of Nevada, she brought in a pedophile, a man who had been defrocked by the Roman Catholic Church for molesting boys, and she made him a priest and didn't tell the church in Las Vegas where he was assigned that he had this background. That's what the priest there told me. And of course, she doesn't respond to any of this stuff. I've had press conferences with her where she's told me things that I know to be demonstrably false. And so everything she says, I have to double check. Now, and as you speak about compassion, how can anybody be mean to Keith Ackerman, for goodness sakes? He's one of the most loving, kind, sweet men who has ever lived. And I don't agree with some of the Anglo-Catholic stuff he gets up to. Excuse me, Bishop. But to be mean to someone like that,
yes,
just to be mean, how does that speak to compassion? And alleviating poverty, well, I guess lawyers are on the edge of society, Kevin, and spending $32 million on lawyers is helping a marginalized group, I guess. But think of how the church could, the $30 million, what could the church done to alleviate poverty, to build up the church in Haiti, to do all these things that it says it wants to do? Instead, it just makes lawyers richer.
Well, to be quite honest, they spent $50,000 to buy the election in Tanzania. $34 million, they could probably own the continent of Africa and Asia with that type of investment. But, wasted money on lawyers, I'm not going to complain. I have lawyers who are friends of mine. But let's get on to box number 3, the Justin Welby part. What on earth is Justin Welby thinking in this? The reality is, before he, the last couple months with his GAFCON relations, he's tried to walk this middle road that, yeah, you guys need to look at the whole picture. GAFCON is great, but the Anglican Church is great, and yeah, you guys just need to get along. And we talked about this in weeks past. Get along to go along to get along. The church is bigger than you think it is. We have now arrived at a point where Archbishop Justin Welby has singled out one of the biggest heretics in the church, somebody who has been more spiritually brutal than anybody in the last 1,000 years, and said this is a model for women's ordination and women's orders in the church. If I were a woman, I would be extremely upset by this. Justin Welby may have just lost his voice to women in the church. Am I off again, George?
No, you're not, Kevin. I mean, Katharine Jefferts Schori's career has been one not of achievement, but of tokenism and symbolism. Mm-hmm. And she's not been a very good presiding bishop, apart from the areas that I've mentioned. And I just can't imagine what Justin Welby was thinking if he actually did write this. Well, because this is such a slap in the face to the Africans.
Justin.
And to women.
Justin.
And to normal thinking people. I'm sorry.
That's right. Justin, if you're watching, until you say otherwise, we're assuming you wrote this. You got nice little quotes around he said, and what a press release. So,
Kevin, our colleague Peter Old has argued that he did not write this because there are giveaway phrases like humankind that Justin Welby, Peter says, would never in a million years use that sort of sloppy language. Or a reference to Desmond Tutu. That's just not Justin Welby, Peter says.
I would disagree. I would say that this was penned in some form, maybe not all of it, by Justin Welby, and the final copy was signed off. And until I hear otherwise, this is from the hand of Archbishop Justin Welby, who's trying to bring the church together, who got the job because he said, I want to evangelize England, and I want to bring all the factions that are at war to peace.
Now, Kevin, one thesis is that this was just handed over from 815 and just Justin Welby's signature was signed off at the bottom. No, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that thesis is not true. And the reason why is that there are two drafts, the two press releases. The first that came out via email to reporters misspelled Katharine Jefferts Schori's name. Now, if you know anything about reporting and Katharine Jefferts Schori, it's that to really upset 815, call her Bishop Schori.
No, don't, yes.
Don't call her Bishop Schori. Or put a hyphen between Jeffords and Schori.
Oh, you're getting
or
back.
Misspell Katharine with a C instead of a K, or spell it Katherine when it's Arine.
No.
Throughout the press release, every time I mentioned the word Katharine, it was misspelled. Now, nobody in 815 who values their life would send out a press statement with the presiding bishop's name misspelled. So somebody in England wrote this. They may have cribbed some of the verbiage from some other places, but this is not an 815 job. This is squarely at Lambeth Palace.
Yeah, Lambeth.
And it's got Justin Welby's name on it.
Either the desk of Justin or the desk of a future unemployed Lambeth person. Now, let's get to the reality. When I write my own press releases, they are that good. If I'm going to write something about myself, it's going to look that good. And I got a life of sin behind me that will never make it to the presser. And, you know, this is going to really bring up interesting conversation for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks until she actually receives this award. How do you receive an honorary degree, George?
It's the 9th Wednesday in Trinity term. Echinacea, I believe it's a ceremony where she and 5 other awards winners in Doctor of Music, Doctor of Human Science, Doctor of Letters, and Doctors of Laws are honored at a ceremony at Oxford University. Do you think, Kevin, that she's going to get a Doctor of Laws from...
No, Yale and Harvard will probably be there first. I mean, American lawyers have made more money off Katharine Jefferts Schori than anybody in England. So We'll just have to go with that. I would imagine Yale will call her, maybe Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, which has a really good constitutional law program, may call her. We'll have to see. George, let's move on to story two. Now, story one was really kind of a George Orwellian 1984 retelling the Ministry of Truth type stuff. Well, story two is going to be much the same, but both are a missed opportunity by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And we don't mean to pick on Justin Welby, but you have two glaring examples of kind of things you missed, and we need to talk about them. And don't blame George, was this my idea. Let's talk about Russia today. George and I are born in the 60s, and we grew up during the 70s and 80s, and we watched communism bolster itself up to the point that it finally fell. Gorbachev finally introduced perestroika, Yeltsin soon replaced him, and the Soviet Union fell, and now we have Russia and a bunch of other former communist states around them. They're going through transitions. One of the things they've not transitioned to is a non-violent reaction to things that offend them, homosexual actions being one of them. Cuba, much the same way. Saudi Arabia, the people who follow Sharia law, Islamic states, Muslim followers, have a much different reaction to homosexuality, LGBTYXYZ people than the church does. They have violent tendencies where the church's response is love the sinner, hate the sin. Justin Welby last week took time to pick on the African nations and the churches in Africa because they were readdressing their sodomy laws when there was a big elephant in the room, Russia, about to have their Olympics, and he could have drawn much fanfare to the violence against homosexuals in Russia rather than trying to be at war, a word of wars, a noodle war as we called it, with Africa, George.
You're right, Kevin. It speaks to me about the misplaced priorities at Lambeth Palace. Do you remember when Rowan Williams went to the Sudan during the Darfur crisis? Tens of thousands of people being killed by government-backed militias in the west of the country. Mm-hmm. And he gives a talk to the BBC, an interview with the BBC, and he talks about human rights violations. He's in the Sudan. There's a Darfur crisis engaged. And what is Rowan Williams talk about? Guantanamo Bay.
Yes.
You know, we can roll our eyes at that sort of silliness, but Justin Welby's engaged in the same sort of thing. The Russian government under Vladimir Putin has encouraged laws that some would call homophobic, others would call violating basic human rights and decency on the issues of homosexuality. And the Russian Orthodox Church, it's pretty comfortable with those laws. They support them by and large. The Anglican churches in Uganda have not been as enthusiastic backers of these anti-gay laws as gay activists like to claim. And some people in the Church of Nigeria, though they are outspoken, they are Nigerians, they're more focused on gay marriage and Western influences rather than the punishing individual homosexuals. Whereas, so all this is going on, and Justin Welby, he could make a statement, he could make a mark, and he could do it as the world turns its attention to Sochi and Russia and Vladimir Putin, and what's he doing? He's talking about the Ugandans, and nobody cares.
Well, and we're not here to help write your press releases. But you're going to be giving many opportunities at Archbishop of Canterbury to stand up and do what you're supposed to do.
Okay.
Yes?
Kevin, I want to go down a rabbit hole so that people can understand sort of where this is coming
Sure.
from. Now, Fidel Castro jailed homosexuals. He put them on the Island of Pines, the
Yeah.
Island of Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was to isolate potential aid carriers. But there was an ideological reason for doing this. See, Castro believed, as did Stalin in what is called Soviet Man,
Mm-hmm.
that your society, that we are a blank slate, and our environment and our society and our ideology turn us into certain types of people. And gays were fighting this. In other words, they were told it was wrong. They were educated why it was wrong, yet they still remained gay. Therefore, they were revolutionaries. They had to be punished. That mindset of the blank slate and not conforming to societal norms remains in Cuba, it remains in Russia, and it's one of the issues that's being fought over in the West. And Justin Welby doesn't engage in these big issues. He doesn't talk about what's really going on, about human rights, about human nature, about how we're created, about God. He engages in noodle wars on homosexuality in order to get the gay lobby office back in the Church of England. This man is supposed to be the leader of a communion, and he just does not exercise that degree of leadership that I would have hoped to have seen.
Well, we're going into year 2 for Justin Welby, and we hope that you will find a new press report writer, that you yourself will look for the elephant in the room before you point out the little, what's it called, sliver in somebody else's eye, and we'll hope the best for you. Okay, I have on the other line Alan Haley, and we're going to talk about something that is new to the procedures we've been following. It's not something that was introduced in San Joaquin or Texas. It's the sit down and shut up clause. Basically, what South Carolina wants to do is avoid this taking so long, and I can't believe a lawyer would have suggested this. Alan, tell me more about this.
Okay. Well, the litigation in South Carolina has been extremely drawn out and convoluted, and that's because the first people into court were Bishop Lawrence
Right.
and his diocese.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw what had gone on in the previous lawsuits of the 4 other withdrawing dioceses, where Episcopal Church basically forms a rump group and then goes into court with that group as a plaintiff, pretending to be the actual entity that has withdrawn, and saying, no, that was an illegal vote, we're canceling that vote, and we're staying in part of the Episcopal Church, and we're still the same entity. Well, that leads to huge confusion among the civil courts, because ordinarily, if an association of people, an unincorporated association, splits up, the majority continues the legal existence in the eyes of the law. The minority has to go off and form its own group. And that's what should happen, and that's what has, in South Carolina, the courts are seeing that's what's happened, because the majority went into court first, and the minority was left out there, and they got an injunction against the minority to stop the minority from trying to assume their identity. So that cut off that strategy, and it was a very important move at the outset of the litigation. Ever since then, the minority group has tried to drag things out, has appealed everything. First, they took the proceedings up to federal court, tried to get the courts there to get interested in it. They wasted 8 months of time fooling around with those courts, and the federal court said, no, this dispute belongs in state court. Sent it back to state courts, which is where we were this past summer, when the remnant group decided a new tactic. They would go after all of the emails between Bishop Lawrence and Chancellor Alan Runyon. Now, Alan Runyon and his communications with Bishop Lawrence are absolutely privileged under the attorney-client privilege. But see, what they did was they said, well, we're really the continuing diocese of South Carolina, and so we're the client now, and we're entitled to waive that privilege, and so we get to see all the emails. And Judge Goodstein said, not so fast. You have to prove that you were the client back in 2008, 2009 when these emails were written, and you weren't even in existence back then, because you only came into existence under South Carolina law in January of 2013 when you held your special meeting in Charleston, the presiding bishop, and you elected a provisional bishop. So they didn't like that ruling at all. They asked her to reconsider it. She denied the motion to reconsider on the last day of this past year, December 31, and now they've taken an appeal from her decision up to the South Carolina Court of Appeals and asked that court to review what she did and reverse it. Well, first of all, it was a discovery order, and discovery orders are not final orders. They're just interlocutory orders in the course of a case. Normally, you can't appeal those. And the first thing the Court of Appeal is going to have to decide with this, or was going to have to decide, is whether or not that appeal could be taken even. And what happened was Bishop Lawrence's attorneys could see that this was going to be another long drawn-out process. So they used the rules of South Carolina Supreme Court to file a request with the South Carolina Supreme Court to accept direct jurisdiction of the appeal, take it away from the Court of Appeal and decide it right here and now. So they would be the final say on it, and then it can come back and go to trial. And they should receive a pretty quick response on this. These motions get decided within a week or two, and we will know exactly whether this tactic has cut them off at the pass or not. In the meantime, it's going to be interesting because, as I say, the South Carolina Supreme Court is, of course, the one that decided All Saints Wakama in September of 2009. Mm-hmm. And that is a key decision because it holds two things. It holds, first of all, that religious organizations are under South Carolina law, and they can amend their governing documents as long as they follow the procedures in those governing documents, and those procedures meet the minimum requirements of South Carolina law. And in that case, the All Saints Wakama Parish amended its Articles of Incorporation to take it out of the Episcopal Church, and they said that's fine. They also said that the Dennis Cannon Trust, which the then Diocese of South Carolina tried to assert against All Saints, was invalid under South Carolina law because it wasn't a trust signed by the person who actually owns the property that a trust is being declared on. The Episcopal Church just sits back there in national headquarters and says, oh, we have a trust on all your property out there, you parishes. Well, not in South Carolina. You have to get actual deeds of trust.
It is interesting because their thought process in the past is try anything. And try anything has been successful. It's not like, we have people like you who say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, and it worked. And so, well, they're going to continue the dumbest thing you've ever heard of because they have a degree of success in that. Now they run into a place like South Carolina, which understands neutral principles a little differently than they do in California.
And they also understand hierarchy, too, yes. Because the Chief Justice who wrote the opinion is a Roman Catholic, and she knows full well what it is to be hierarchical. And the Episcopal Church doesn't fit that bill. So they have the problem there. And you see, ever since that decision, if you remember, there was a thought of the Episcopal Church was going to take a writ of certiorari from the All Saints Wakama decision up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Right. But it muffed that because it didn't didn't come in as a direct party. And then when the parties settled, the Diocese of South Carolina and the parish settled under Bishop Lawrence, and Bishop Lawrence began giving quitclaim deeds to all of his parishes in compliance with the Supreme Court's ruling. That really caused the whole problem now with the Episcopal Church and the Remnant Group and started this whole thing. But in any event, they are studiously, the Remnant Group and their attorneys are studiously avoiding any mention of the All Saints Wakama decision in their legal papers. They barely acknowledge its existence. And they tend to dismiss it by saying, oh, well, that's just a decision for a parish that was had its deed to its property back in the 1700s. That doesn't apply to these others. No, it applies. It says a trust in South Carolina, to be valid, has to be signed by the person owning the property, and that disqualifies any trust under the Dennis Canon right there.
But it's things like this little appeal that have brought them great victories. They won property in Pittsburgh on a technicality.
Right.
And so they look for these little technicalities and that try anything approach, and they're surprised as you are that they win sometimes. So like, whoa, the judge fell for that.
We lawyers have a word for that back, in trial lawyers anyway.
Yes.
When the other side is trying to confuse the facts and make everyone's mind very uncertain, everything, that's like a squid. They squirt out the ink to hide the fact that they really don't have a case. And I'm afraid that's the tactics that are going on here. They don't have a case. This money is being wasted. I have to make that point here, because in South Carolina, there's a ruling from the highest court. Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. Loud phones are good.
There's a ruling from the highest court already against them. And so they should be concentrating on a real narrow focus strategy just to cause that to be reversed. Instead, they're litigating in every possible court. They're spending millions and millions of dollars, and it's really just an effort to punish Bishop Lawrence and those who are loyal to him. And that is not a proper use of nonprofit assets. That is a waste of nonprofit assets of the Episcopal Church, and that really ought to be looked into in the New York authorities. But unfortunately, I'm busy right now defending 2 other lawsuits against the Episcopal Church. But I hope someone somewhere takes this into account. Yeah. It really needs to be looked into. It's not proper.
But Alan, I'm kind of disappointed that she got an honorary degree in divinity and not an honorary degree in law.
Yeah, who knew that the University of Oxford had a school of litigation?
It's just amazing. George, if you checked your email on Friday, you've discovered that the Archbishop of the ACNA has decided it's time now for the church to take up immigration reform. And I've been in America now for 48 years, and I have to agree that it's time to address this situation. George, is it time to address it?
Yes, it's a time to address it, but I don't like the answers being put forward.
Yeah, there is a time to address it, and at a certain point, it's just going to be too late to address it, and so the sooner the better. However, there are many ideas out there on how to address immigration reform. But George and I need to take and step back and help you look at the big picture. The big picture is the greatest generation of people, the World War II generation, has died out and is dying out. But if you look at how they lived their lives, it was much different than how we live our lives now in the 21st century. They had gone through something called a depression, so they learned the value of saving money. They learned the value of being citizenship. They learned the value of hard work. They had a completely different understanding of Americans than we do. Now, in this 21st century, we have not had a famine in America. We have not had a depression. We've had a couple recessions. We whine when our coffee's too cold or too hot. We have a completely different mindset than early Americans. Now, in talking about immigration reform, do we have to completely readdress our mindset? Do we want to replicate the old Americana that people actually came here for America to immigrate to? Where do we start with this? Do we have to go through welfare reform, Social Security reform? There is a point that we have to start, but nobody knows. And if you start at the very last leg in immigration reform, it'll just be a broken piece, because we've tried immigration reform before. If you guys remember, we kind of had an instant amnesty back in the 90s. That didn't work. We thought for sure this would stop people from coming in. More people came in. And when I look at the big picture, I see the American boat, which we call the USA, full of holes, and we're sinking. Well, we're trying to bail out the water, but we're not fixing the holes. At a certain point, it sinks because we never address the problem.
Kevin, I agree with you. You're 100% right that it's not just immigration. It's welfare reform. It's education reform. It's legal reforms. All of these things are all tied together in a package because, frankly, our society is not working the way it should. Now, I look at the community where I live and the community where I minister. It's roughly 40% white, 40% black, and 20% Hispanic. And that Hispanic proportion is growing. The problems in my community are youth unemployment. And that when I was growing up in the summers, I would work on golf courses. One summer, I unloaded freight cars in a rail yard. I did manual labor. I cut grass. My daughter's contemporaries in high school, the boys, they cannot find work because the work that kids did 20, 30, 40 years ago today are being done by illegal aliens, immigrants. In my community, the black community is being undercut in the labor market by lower priced, it's very common to have houses with 15, 20 single men working who send all their money home from Mexico, to Mexico or to Central America. And then across the street is an African-American family where they're unable to find work, even if they wanted to get out of the welfare system, because they're going to be undercut by their neighbors. And it's just destroying the community, the economic base.
And that's why when you look at a small picture like immigration reform, you really have to look at the bigger picture issues. And we have so many big issues that we need to take care of before we can even look at immigration reform. And a lot of that is, the joke of minimum wage. If you're going to allow illegal immigration into this country and have porous borders, there's no such thing as a minimum wage. There are farms here in Connecticut, I know. Connecticut farmland, are you kidding? Where there are many illegal Mexican people here taking in $3-4 an hour when the farmer is supposed to be paying $9.50 an hour. And so the farm owner can hire 3 Mexicans or 1 American. Well, he's going to take the 3 Mexicans.
And the other thing to think of is that our education system are turning out people who are unprepared for the labor force that we have. These kids graduating from high schools have no skills. And there's some people in my congregation. There's one fellow who has a machine shop. And he tells me, he could hire, if it weren't for some of the government burdens being put on us, like the Health Care Act, he's trying to find machinists, people who have skills. Blue-collar, skilled labor is in very short supply. And the kids coming out of high school are totally useless to him. And so he would expand his business if he could, if the labor force was there. But instead, we have an unskilled labor force competing against an illegal labor force.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is immigration reform is needed, but it's one small little sliver in a big package of things that America has to reform before it can even address immigration reform. Right now, we're a sinking boat. And we're bailing the water out, but we're not fixing the holes, and that's not going to stop us from sinking. That's the earnest reality we're within. So George and I do stand on Archbishop Duncan's call for immigration reform. We're just not certain that the church is in the place right now that it can do anything without addressing other bigger issues that the church as a whole, little c, has taken pleasure in and prompted. I don't know how old you people are as viewers, but you certainly remember when most hospitals were Catholic hospitals or Lutheran hospitals, not private wealth-making hospitals. It was just a different system, and the greatest generation is no longer upon us.
Kevin, 100 years ago, churches in the Northeast, almost all of the city churches had classes for new immigrants, how to learn English, how to assimilate into our culture. The churches built high schools and schools. And today, if the church put its time and energy into helping, yes, it's right to help these people in our midst, but we should help them by teaching them English and by setting up education. Trade schools are much, much more important to our society's future than more liberal arts education. That's good, that's fine, but a community college graduate with an English degree is useless.
It's true. Go figure. And that's one of the important parts. What is the church's role in this? And I think the church's role in this is to go back to the classical way we used to do this. We used to do this through education. We used to be the hospitals. We used to be so much more a part of the community than we are now. Now we're that building on the side of the road that you drive by, and every once in a while they have a sign for the Sunday Bazaar. That's not what the church used to be. Via the magic of Skype, I have Peter from Canterbury. Peter, is it true that your degree is from Oxford?
For what it's worth.
George, let's close out episode 91. For those of you who watched episode 89, I mentioned quickly in the closing that we're doing a new program to get the to get some free advertising for Anglican Unscripted and Anglican TV, and I was going to highlight any websites of churches that had our logo on their front page. And I didn't expect much response, but immediately a couple people emailed me and asked how the program's going to work. And, oh, by the way, look, we already have it. And so let me tell you how the program's going to work. Every week at the closing, George and I are going to highlight the churches that have the Anglican TV logo on their front page to put your church out in the world, but it also puts us out in the world because it gives a place where people can go off your website to see Anglican TV. Now, we're going to allow this for Anglican TV or Anglican Unscripted logos. If you go to Anglican.tv/logo, you will see how the program works. I'll explain in further details what logos apply. Either it's the 2 headshot for Unscripted or the Anglican TV logo. You put that on the front page of your church website or your diocese website or your ministry website, and we will highlight you in the next show. Just send me an email, and you have to put logo in the subject. It's complicated, but you'll get the hang of it after you go to the website, which is at the bottom link here, Anglican.tv/logo. So we had a response, and it was from the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Maryland, and I'm showing you their website right now. They have a patriotic flag on the front, which is cute. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see the Anglican TV logo, and that's exactly what we're looking for. This way we promote you, you promote us. It's kind of free advertising, quid pro quo style. George, we're also doing a new program feature called Unscripted Live. Tell us about that.
Kevin, we're going to be doing a program where 2 days a week, Mondays and Wednesdays, we'll have a live 5-10-minute broadcast of Anglican Unscripted, but a very much shorter one, as in addition to our Friday broadcasts of a 30 to 40-minute show.
Right. What we're trying to do here is to bring you quicker news, more breaking news in a shorter format, because news delivery can't wait for us to sit down on a camera once a week or once every 2 weeks. And George and I have time in our schedules where we can sit down at maybe 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. I just push the live to YouTube button. You can watch us live, or if you wait for about 5 minutes after the show is done, it will be put in the archives and you can watch it like a regular unscripted show. We're trying to experiment with formats. You can help us out. You guys helped us out a lot with Anglican Unscripted and how we format this by sending us emails saying, guys, your heads are too big, sit back, you're a little bit to the left, your mics don't work. Kevin, get a haircut. So we appreciate your feedback in the new Unscripted Live. You will receive an email probably the day before we do our first run. We're hoping next Friday will be our first live run test, and we'll invite you to watch that. It should be fun for both George and I and the viewer, of course. That's it for news for us. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 91 of Anglican Unscripted.
Three, two, one. George and I are taking a quick time out here for episode 91. We are about to receive our bronze medal for pair skating at the Sochi Olympics. You can send congratulations later. George, quite a day on the ice.
Yes, you should have heard. Oh my.
Is there an earthquake there, George?
No, it's just
you're not
stand is not as tight as it can be.
Well, no, and you're not used to wearing ice skates in the house, and so obviously your feet are longer, and you knocked it over.
No, it just